Greetings, YouTube. Frances Keller and her husband are in prison. They're in prison for being members of a supposed satanic cult that preyed upon children in a daycare. They've been in prison for 20 years. There have been appeals to release these people because, in reality, this crime very possibly didn't happen. In fact, almost assuredly didn't happen. A lot of the information involved in this case was based on the testimony of one James Randall Noblet, a self-proclaimed expert on satanic rituals and events, talking about crimes, of course, that he very likely either made up intentionally or made up because he is delusional. And there's a portion in this article I'm going to be reading, linking to you to, where Noblet discusses in a book he wrote. And in the footnote of the book, he makes a reference, he discusses a guy named Mike Warnke. And in the footnote he says, naturally, Warnke and his published opinions have attracted criticism and controversy. And he makes a reference to two different papers, one in 1990 and one in 92. And in 92 one was written by Trott and Hertenstein. Now, Trott and Hertenstein debunked everything Mike Warnke ever said concerning satanic rituals. Just wiped them out completely. And this guy, this supposed expert in this case, that sent real people based on fictional crimes to prison, it says Noblet acknowledges that Trott and Hertenstein exist, but does not mention that they thoroughly debunked every claim Mike Warnke ever made about satanic cults, exposing him as a liar and a con artist. Instead, Noblet just darkly hints that, naturally, the satanic conspiracy has attacked Warnke for his bold stand against it. Warnke was a grifter, but he had a remarkable talent for concocting the kinds of lurid nightmares his evangelical audience wanted to believe were true. He realized that his audience wasn't horrified by his tales of babies mutilated in satanic rituals. His audience was tantalized by those tales. That audiences wanted and wished and needed such implausible horrors to be true, and they still do. It doesn't matter if it's all a lie. That fantasy, the fantasy of satanic baby killers, is what gives their lives meaning. That there's a certain segment, now this is my comment, there's a certain segment in amongst theists that always need the most fantastical, horrible, satanic events to be true. And I've found this both in evangelical Christians and amongst evangelical Muslims. It's interesting that, often the evangelical Christians will portray Muslims in this light, and Muslims will often portray Americans in this light, who are often evangelical Christians. It's kind of interesting that they do that. But both groups want to believe in the most horrifying, lurid, tantalizing stories. Now, I can remember having that kind of mindset when I was a kid. I was 12, 13 years old, and you want those things to be real because they're exciting, because they are the absolute extremes that you can imagine, and for some reason, you latch onto those concepts. But eventually, if you mature and you grow up and you achieve empathy and sympathy and compassion, and you start looking at the world around you, you come to realize that while there are real events that are as horrifying, I would even go so far as to say more horrifying, that they are so rare that they are almost fantasies themselves. And there aren't networks of people in the world doing this, folks. There aren't thousands of cultists of whatever variety you'd like to name. Then the current flavor is satanic cultists, but I am sure that at other parts of the past they were called something else by some other group of people. But this need, this desire has always existed. These people want these shadowy things just beyond the edge of the campfire, where the flickering light hides them. They want to believe that right out there are horrible things. And part of it is that lurid desire for that fantasy. And part of it is because it's a useful tool for control. Follow our guidelines. Do what we say. Or the things out there will get you. Those things out there are there. They're always looking for ways to get you. Every moment of every day, every second, they're trying to find ways to get at you. And we, your religious or political or whatever leaders at the moment, are the only thing protecting you. And that's a lovely fantasy, and I guess it's an appropriate tool, I guess, of some variety if you want to control others. But here in the real world, real people have gone to prison because of that fantasy. And that's a crime. I can remember here in my state of New Hampshire, there was a Satanic Panic at one point. In the city of Concord, people had brought evidence to the police that there were satanic ritualists in their area. They had heard drums at night. Someone found a stone circle in the forest. And they also, and the police, when investigating, also found animals that had been mutilated. And they brought in an expert, and they dropped I think it was like $100,000 on this guy to tell them all about satanic panics and have this ritual network of cultists that were out to get them all. And he was trying to convince them, and out those there in the darkness, in the shadows, there were things trying to get them. But then some of the police actually did their jobs, and they looked into the three things that had been reported and connected to each other and discovered that they weren't connected in the least. And there were plausible explanations for all three. The drums? Those drums were a teenage kid whose father slept in the daytime and worked at night. I sleep in the daytime and work at night. If I had a kid, I'd really appreciate he didn't play drums while I was trying to sleep. The stone circle? A bunch of kids playing fort in the forest. They just put some stones in a circle to pretend it was a fort. That's it. And the animals? Trappers. It's legal to trap animals within certain limits in the United States. And people that do the trapping are after the skins. And only the skins. So they trap the animals, they skin the animals, and they dump the animals. Something will eat them. They weren't concerned about it, and they shouldn't have been. It wasn't a crime. None of these things were crimes. None of these things were linked. But someone linked them together because it fit their lurid fantasy. Now, thankfully, no one was harmed in this particular case. No one was ever accused of anything, and it was proven to be just nothing but a tissue of lies. There was no panic. There were no cultists. There were no rituals. But real people went to prison because of these things. And we need to right that wrong. We need to fix that. I would like to also see the people that purported this to be true brought to trial, but that is very unlikely in the United States. Because there's an audience for this. There are people who want this to be true. No matter how implausible it is, no matter how much it doesn't make sense, they need it to be true. And that is scary.